And when you knock us down, we're going to get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off.
Go ahead and say it, Ed. Go Tigers!
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
You like that? You like that?
F it. Jamar's down there somewhere.
The New Orleans Saints select Marcus Davenport.
No!
Splash Brothers. Yeah.
It's playoff. Keep going, Brace.
The playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
Through our usual beginning of the pod. So, Lord, thank you for this opportunity to come to you and talk about football and fellowship, and just continue to let us learn something and spread your name as we fellowship and talk about this wonderful game that you blessed us to be able to enjoy, Lord. And we just thank you for everything you continue to give us and bless us with. And please let us shine a light for you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. First off, we want to thank our sponsors, Big Reed BBQ, Automotive Detailing Solutions, This Little Piggy Barbecue Food Truck, Mimi's Children's Boutique, and brand new coming at you, a new sponsor, Doug Damona Farm and Feed. Thank y'all. We appreciate y'all joining and supporting the pod. So they're brand new, so they're going to be our title sponsor for this pod. Doug Damona Farm and Feeds, a family-owned and operated farm supply and nursery. There you can find a wide variety of pet and livestock feeds, supplements, vet supplies, plants, seeds, and fertilizer located on Highway 167 just north of the Hodge Mill in Hodge, Louisiana. You can be sure you'll be treated like family at Doug Damona Farm and Feed. And from their family to yours, thank you for their business. And we appreciate y'all's business and supporting our pod, and we will do what we can to spread the word and help y'all out as much as we can, and try to go by there and pick up your corn for deer season coming up. So I know they would appreciate it. Moving on, previewing some pods that are coming up later this week. Of course, we'll have our start sit sleeper graphic will come out on Facebook and social media, and then also we'll record that start sit sleeper pod at the end of this week. Josh and I think Clay's going to be able to get back with us. Jumping right on into our news segment. Unfortunately, a big one for the Los Angeles Chargers. Mike Williams goes down with a torn ACL, and he will be out for the season. We'll talk about his replacements in a little bit. Austin Eckler was ruled out before the game this weekend, and now they're reporting that he has a quote-unquote higher type of ankle sprain. Didn't see that coming, quote-unquote. But anyway, we knew that there was something more to it than just a regular ankle sprain. So now they're calling it a higher type of sprain. He says that he hopes to return this next week. We'll see. Now we're sitting, let's see, this was 2 weeks that he's missed. So typical high ankle sprains, anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. So we'll see if he comes back this week or not. Jalen Waddle ended up being ruled out for a concussion this past weekend in the 70-point game that they had, which was crazy. Couldn't imagine if they would have had Jalen Waddle, it could have been more than 70 points. But anyway, he's still in the concussion protocol as of Monday and did not practice, which is pretty crazy, but that is the case. Also next will be Aaron Jones. With a hamstring injury. He was limited in a couple practices at the end of last week. Thought he had a good chance to play, but ended up being ruled out eventually for the weekend game. He was a limited participant in Monday's walkthrough. Don't forget that Green Bay plays Detroit on Thursday night, so this early practice in the week is pretty big if he's going to play Thursday. Given that he would have been a limited participant today, I'd be watching his practice participation on Tuesday and Wednesday. If he gets a full one in, I would guarantee you he's going to play, but I would keep an eye on that. His teammate Christian Watson, also nursing a hamstring injury that has not even played this year, was a non-participant in the walkthroughs today, which does not bode well for him being activated on Thursday. So we'll just have to keep an eye on their practice participation. Christian Watson would really help one of our waiver wire pickups if he came back, but they seem to be doing okay and winning without him. So when he does come back, that offense possibly could look even better. And then last but not least, David Montgomery with a thigh injury ended up getting ruled out, was limited in practice on Monday in their walkthrough. Of course, plays for Detroit, so he plays on Thursday night. So this could be big, but I think David Montgomery has a good chance to come back because they made it sound like he was kind of close to coming back before this past weekend's game. So that's going to pretty much round out a very abbreviated injury segment. We're going to cover more on our Start Sit Sleeper pod. I'll run through them again, and we'll have a little bit more updates on some of those guys and some of the other guys. So we're going to go ahead and roll right on into our waiver wire week 3, and we're start off with our quarterbacks. And number 1, and he's going to be number 1 pretty much until he either gets hurt or gets up over the 60% threshold, and that's going to be Jared Goff for Detroit. I mean, they're going at Green Bay this week. More of the same, honestly. I mean, it really, to me, I mean, I don't even know if I would not start him if he was going against San Francisco because, I mean, their offense just looks in sync. They're moving the ball around. Sam Laporta's starting to emerge as a top pass catching option in this, not the, but a top pass catching option in this offense. And he's breaking out as a rookie, which is unheard of at the tight end position. Not to mention Jameson Williams is coming back in week 7. So that can only help the offense. And if David Montgomery comes back to establish the run, it's going to make the play action even more effective. So I like Jared Goff a lot this week. And not only that, he's the 7th ranked quarterback in fantasy football so far. And he's only 57.4% owned. So if you need some help at quarterback, go out and pick him up or stash him on your bench for a bye week replacement. You really can't go wrong with him there. Next be CJ Stroud in my number 2 pickup for Houston. Only owned in 11.2% of leagues. He was on this list last week, just like Jared Goff. And he's probably going to be on it until he starts to flub up or he starts to stop throwing the ball 40 times a game. But this week coming up, they're going to be playing at home against Pittsburgh. Honestly, it's not just about CJ Stroud throwing the ball a lot. It has a lot to do with some big time playmakers around him breaking out, such as Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Damian Pierce is starting to kind of get it going again. They don't have the best run blocking offensive line, so it's kind of hard for him, but that run threat is there with his talent. And CJ Stroud's been pretty solid. Those offensive line has been pretty banged up. They're starting to get healthier. And if they start to hold up more, I mean, he looks pretty confident as a passer. And I kind of got to say, he kind of gives me that Deshaun Watson vibe when he came into Houston. Let's just hope he can stay away from the massage parlors. But he could get better. And as his offensive line gets better, they got kind of a tougher schedule coming up, but volume is king, right? And if he's throwing 35 to 45 times a game, that's going to garner a lot of stats. But currently the 10th ranked quarterback through 3 weeks, and give me some CJ Stroud. Honestly, I got Russell Wilson in the league who's been okay, but I'm thinking about starting some CJ Stroud over him just because, because of the inconsistency with Russell Wilson right now. And I like CJ Stroud's playmakers around him a lot more. And then don't even forget about Dalton Schultz, that's kind of, in the background there, getting overshadowed by Nico Collins and Tank Dell, but Dalton Schultz is still there. Great pass catching tight end. So that's my number 2. Number 3 is going to be Jordan Love. Unfortunately for New Orleans fans, we got to see Love close up this past weekend and come from behind and beat us on Sunday, which was pretty terrible. But he's kind of doing more of the same. He does tend to worry me a little bit more as I feel like he's kind of overproducing a little bit, but just because his pass rate completion percentage is only around 53% for the season, it's staying in the 50s for 3 games, and that's not that great. And that to me would seem like something that would eventually come back to catch up with you. But either way, he's putting up good fantasy points. And he also, against New Orleans, whenever the game was on the line and they had to make plays, he rushed 9 times for 39 yards and a touchdown. So he can still get it done with his legs. He did in college a fair amount, and then he hasn't really since he come to the NFL. But the first 2 weeks he didn't, but he can still do it. And if he does that a little bit more, I mean, that could really put him inside the top 10 at quarterback if he runs even 6-7 times a game for something like that and keeps throwing for a high volume of touchdowns, which is not something that's normally sustainable. But anyway, Jordan Love but this week, Thursday night, going against Detroit, which is a good defense to go up against. I don't like Thursday night games, as y'all know, but Jordan Love going against Detroit could be a shootout. And Detroit's probably going to put up more points in New Orleans offense. So if that's the case, Jordan Love could have another big week. Not to mention, if he gets Aaron Jones back this week, that could really help him out, especially in the short passing game. And when he gets Christian Watson back, it's only going to get easier and better for him. But now that doesn't seem like it's going to happen this week. And then not only that, but he's the sixth-rate quarterback currently in fantasy. So, and he's only owned at 47%. So go out and check, see if you got Jordan Love out there. It might be somebody you might be interested in. And last, this is kind of an extra, not somebody that I'm really focusing on, but Andy Dalton from Carolina this week going up against Minnesota. He's owned in like hardly 2% of leagues. I like him if Bryce Young misses time or if they sit him and decide to let Dalton start and let Bryce Young get some more experience behind Andy Dalton. I mean, what can you say? Last week, he threw the ball 34, 58, 361, and 2 touchdowns at Seattle. Like at Seattle. That's not the easiest place to play. They don't have the best defense, but not the easiest place to play. Put up big-time stats. And this week, he's going to be at home against Minnesota, who we know does not have a very strong secondary for passers. So Andy Dalton, if Bryce Young sits, will be another dark horse there to put up another big fantasy week. That's going to round out our quarterbacks, rolling on to our running backs. Devin Cha-Ching A-Chain, sweet mother. All right. This week, I mean, he's only owned at 16.5%. I mean, unless you live under a rock, then you probably know what he did last week, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. This week, he's going to have a little bit tougher matchup at Buffalo. And honestly, I'm not expecting him to completely take over this backfield or anything like that, or in the offense. I mean, but you can't ignore his impressive playmaking ability, nor the injury history of Mostert in front of him, and the opportunity he has in that offense. And as we've seen an offense that put up 70 points, even if you got the second running back with his playmaking ability in that offense, you want a part of it. And he's available in a ton of leagues. So he might not be a league winner right now, but a couple things fall his way, and you're talking about a top 10 running back possibly if he gets the volume and this offense keeps rolling like it is. And you can't say that about 95% of the waiver wire targets throughout a whole season. And he is one that you could say could be a league winner and is a true lottery ticket. That if you hit on, he could hit big. But this past week, 18 rushes for 203 yards. That's 11.28 yards per carry. I'm not even worried about the touchdowns that he got. He got a touchdown for rushing, touchdown for receiving, but the yards per carry is just crazy impressive, even a blowout. And I mean, I'm at least trying to pick him up and sit him and just see what kind of workload he has against Buffalo with Mostert after he has this performance. Because Mike McDaniel's he's not an idiot. He's seen his ability out there. And if you can't tell me he's not going to have some packages, some schemes ready for him to go against Buffalo. So I like Devin A-Chain a lot, and he is definitely one that you want to pick up and at least stash, if not play at the flex this week against Buffalo. And number 2 for me is going to be Kareem Hunt in Cleveland. He's owned at 57.9% already. This week he's got against Baltimore. Yes, I know Jerome Ford came in, accidentally fell in the end zone for 2 touchdowns. But other than that, Jerome Ford looked pretty terrible, let's be honest. And then, so Kareem Hunt comes in for like 3 days and already has a 20% snap count. All right. 5 carries and 3 targets. And he's there for 3 days. Not great yards per carry average, but give him a little time to get chemistry back with O-line. Ford only played 56% of the snaps, 56% of the snap shares in this game, had 10 carries and 3 targets. And he just fell in the end zone twice to salvage his day. Otherwise, it would have been terrible, and we'd be talking more about Kareem Hunt. And I don't think that happens every week. I think this is at least a committee going forward. And if not, I mean, if Ford, his efficiency keeps being suspect at best, then I really think that there's a chance that Hunt could end up taking over eventually behind this great offensive line. And Deshaun Watson looks like he's starting to throw the ball a little bit better. So there's no telling what could happen. It could open up some holes a little bit more for either one of them. But at least I say add him for the depth, and I think that and they say they added from the depth, but I'd say add him for depth at running back and take a chance to see if he eclipses Jerome Ford in that backfield. Number 3 for me is going to be a guy that a lot of people are calling loser in after week 3, but Kenneth Gainwell. He's honestly more almost – he's in a timeshare running back right now in Philadelphia. He's on in 52% of leagues. This week they got Minnesota coming up, which is a pretty tough matchup. But he's in a timeshare with Swift, and Swift has been far more efficient and looked a lot better and looked like he could run away with the job, but they're not letting Swift do that, because they know in Swift's injury history. And I can go ahead and bet that they're going to try, with their history as well as sharing the backfield, they're going to try to hold Swift down and minimize his carries to where he's maximum efficient. And that's going to give Gainwell opportunity, not to mention if Swift does get banged up, we're talking about Gainwell could be a 70% workload in this run-heavy offense behind probably the best running offensive line in the league. So Kenneth Gainwell, somebody you want to keep in mind. He had 14 carries after coming back from the injury, and Swift only had 16. Now, he was far less efficient, where Swift had like 130 yards, and I think Gainwell had like 60. But he also has some pass-catching upside. And Philly just doesn't throw the ball a lot to their running backs, but Swift does catch at least a couple passes each game. And then last but certainly not least, at the running back position, Tajay Spears for Tennessee. He's only owned in like 15.7% of leagues. This week they're going up against Cincinnati. Last week, pretty tough matchup. It's a tough game period for Tennessee running the ball. And honestly, I don't know if it had something to do with Derrick Henry's late addition to the injury report, but Tajay Spears outsnapped Henry 56-38 and 56% to Henry's 38%, which is very strange for Tennessee. But neither were very effective at all. But Spears got the passing work with 4 targets and 3 catches when Henry didn't even get a single target. Which is kind of crazy. So Spears outsnapped Henry and got the passing volume. I'm not here saying Tajay Spears is going to take over this backfield from Henry. I'm just saying I feel like Henry, there's something going on with Henry. Maybe it's an injury or something, and they're kind of being very cautious with him. But with that being the case, if they end up deciding to rest Henry, Tajay Spears could have a lot of upside going forward, getting the bulk of the workload in this backfield. And he's definitely somebody you want to stash because he's got big playability, great pass catcher. And they do have a tough matchup going up against Cincinnati at home, which is the 9th defense against running back this season so far. They just held Kyron Williams to like 38 yards on Monday Night Football. But Tennessee is also a more run-heavy offense than the Rams are. So Tajay Spears was going to round out our running back waiver wire pickups. We're going to move right on into our wide receiver pickups. And I'll be honest, this is just a little bit different order, but the exact same list as last week because these guys all balled out and they're all still less than 60% owned. And I think all of them still need to be owned in at least 60% of leagues. And so it's just a complete repeat. I just redid the order a little bit in priority because I think that these guys in this priority, and it could be even a little out of this, but I think these guys in this priority is pretty much where they're going to land. But number 1 for me wide receiver is going to be Adam Thielen for Carolina, owned in 54.2% of leagues. He's now the 11th ranked wide receiver in fantasy. Not saying that's going to continue, but that should definitely catch your attention when he has been doing that with rookie Bryce Young and then Andy Dalton at quarterback in Carolina. This past week with Andy Dalton, 14 targets, 11 catches, 145 yards, and 1 touchdown at Seattle. And now he gets the worst ranked secondary in the league in Minnesota. Sign me up for a low-end RB wide receiver 2 flex at worst. Whether you got Bryce Young throwing or Andy Dalton throwing, going up against Minnesota, who they're going to have to probably throw the ball to compete with. He's not going to be on this list next week. There's no way he's going to be over 60%. But I think Adam Thielen can definitely give you some good production, especially if, say, you lost Mike Williams. He could be a solid person to plug in at wide receiver 2 at least this week. If not going forward, if Andy Dalton starts even more, because I like him a lot more with Andy Dalton. Number 2 for me is going to be Tank Dell or a.k.a. Nathaniel Dell, his real name, but Tank Dell for Houston, only owned in 23.5% of leagues this past week. I'm just going to repeat what I said last week. Lightning in a bottle. Seems like he's developing a great rapport with C.J. Stroud, and if he keeps getting the opportunity that we're talking about, he could at least be a high-end flex or wide receiver 3, at least. This week he goes against Pittsburgh. Honestly, he looks like the number 2 in this offense, led by a rookie quarterback. This past week, 7 targets, 5 catches for 145 yards and touchdown, with a 20-yard per target, receiving. So he's averaging getting a target at 20 yards. All right. And then he's averaging 29 yards per catch. So not only is he averaging 20 yards per target, but then he's averaging another 9 yards after the catch, 20 yards down the field. I mean, if that don't scream big playability, I don't know what does. And with only 61% snap count this past week, putting up those kind of numbers, you can bet that's going to go up. And I would think he's going to have a good chance to sustain at least decent volume. And to be honest, this kind of gives me like a poor man's Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase vibe with these two guys, because they've been putting up some big plays the last 2 weeks way down the field. And I feel like C.J. Stroud's just like, forget it. Tank Dell's down there somewhere, and he chunks it. And he seems to be coming down the ball. So Tank Dell's my number 2. Number 3, it's going to be Tutu Atwell for the Los Angeles Rams at 59.8%. Almost didn't even make the list. He won't be on it next week. But this week they're going to be at Indianapolis. Well, I hope you got your tickets for last week for the Tutu train because he ended up leading the Los Angeles Rams in targets and fantasy points on Monday Night Football. He had 9 targets for the second week in a row, ended up with only 4 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. Not the efficiency you like to see, but Stafford is really looking his way and trying to get him the ball because it seems like he's really making plays after the catch with a 5 yard per target. So only 5 yards per target, but he's averaging at least 12.5 yards per catch. So that means he's getting down the field a pretty good bit after he catches the ball. He would be higher on my list, but I just don't know how this situation shakes out once Cooper Kupp comes back. I just know that I want to have him on my team whenever we find out. And he'll be another guy that won't be on this list next week, though. And then last but certainly not least in our wide receivers, it's going to be the combination of Josh Palmer or Quentin Johnston. Honestly, this is obviously unfortunate due to the vacated volume of Mike Williams after tearing his ACL. But this combo pick right here is really because either could be very important or neither because they cancel themselves out when they end up splitting usage. But to me, I feel like Quentin Johnston is by far the more talented of the two and has almost identical size comparison of Mike Williams, who was often compared to him in the preseason due to his playmaking ability. And I think he's more likely to fill the role. But he lacks the experience in the offense and the knowledge of the route tree. So until he kind of gets that under his belt, it could be Josh Palmer and then turn into Quentin Johnston or vice versa. You know, I just don't think Quentin Johnston jumps in there and takes over. And that's why I say they could kind of cancel each other out as they work Johnston in. Palmer could be in there too. But Palmer, on the other hand, has the experience, has filled in for Williams in the past, and, has been fairly sufficient. But you got to ask yourself, like, if they loved Palmer like so much, why did they go out and draft Johnston? So I just feel like Quentin Johnston is eventually gonna take over that role. But either way, the volume of the passing in this offense, especially with the run game lacking without Eckler, is more than likely going to carry one of these guys to really be a supportive role for your team. And that's going to round out our wide receivers. We're going to jump right on into our tight ends, or the AKA the craps of fantasy football, where you just got to roll the dice and cross your fingers and hope one of them hits. But number one is going to be Zach Ertz, who didn't hit last week, which is crazy because Arizona ended up beating Dallas, and Zach Ertz wasn't even a part of that, which is nuts. But he's only owned in 58.7% of leagues. I'm still putting him at number one on this list just because of the target volume he was getting. Honestly, last week, I think it was just because they were leading. They only threw the ball 21 times for the whole game to beat Dallas, which is nuts. This week they do have a tougher matchup against San Francisco, but Ertz is still the 5th most targeted tight end in the league. So I feel like that's going to get back to where they're going, because also they're more than likely going to be in a negative game script against San Francisco, and especially this week with a tough San Francisco defense. I think that Ertz could be somewhat of a safety valve for Josh Dobbs in that game, and somebody that they check the ball down to a lot, just trying to move the ball down the field. So I think Ertz gets back close to a 5 catch for 50 yards game. Number 2 for me is going to be Luke Musgrave for Green Bay, only owned in 13.3% of leagues. And we really got to see him up close, New Orleans fans, last week, as he had 8 targets, 6 catches for 49 yards. This week he gets a pretty cruddy Detroit defense on Thursday night. Still not crazy about Thursday night players, but this is a good matchup that I think could end up being a shootout. And Musgrave is the 10th ranked tight end in fantasy currently in scoring. So, and he gets the 31st ranked defense against tight ends in Detroit Thursday night. So I think it's a great matchup. If they're going to be trailing, it looked like that Jordan Love was looking for Luke Musgrave, obviously, with 8 targets. He caught 6 for 49. And Luke Musgrave is a really underrated athletic tight end. So I think there's a good chance that he could be heavily involved in the game script this week. And Detroit's defense has given up at least 15 points to tight ends every week this season so far. So there's that also. Next and last at tight end is going to be Gerald Everett for the Los Angeles Chargers, only owned at 32.9% leagues this week against Las Vegas Raiders. Honestly, has been very underwhelming and disappointing so far this season, and not somebody that I was thinking about going to until I had a friend of mine that kind of said, he was like, "What do you think about Gerald Everett?" And I started deep diving into him a little bit, and I was like, you know what? He could be somebody that sees some of that Mike Williams volume. And I told him he was right. So he hasn't done anything hardly at all this season, but they're going up against Las Vegas, who's ranked the 28th ranked defense against tight ends this week. Last week, he had 6 targets, 6 catches for 30 yards after Mike Williams ended up leaving. I think his volume boosted a little bit. We could see some more of that this week. And honestly, he probably could have had a lot better year if his touchdowns wouldn't keep getting vultured by Donald Parham, who has 3 on the year with like 5 catches on the year. I don't think that continues, by the way. But anyway, that has been happening also, which has probably been keeping Everett's name down. But also, I think Everett and Herbert have a good chemistry that we've seen in the past, and especially whenever the wide receiver injuries pile up, he likes to go to Everett because he's comfortable with him. So I like Everett, and I think he could be somebody that could be beneficial, especially as barren as the tight end wasteland is. That could be somebody you look at. And then we're going to jump right on down. Just a couple streaming defenses for you real quick, and then we'll wrap up. But Cincinnati at Tennessee. Cincinnati's defense is starting to seem like it is the real deal. They're the number 11th ranked defense so far in fantasy scoring, and they are going up against the 29th ranked defense for an offense to go against, which means Tennessee's given up the 29th, as far as giving up points. They're averaging giving up 16 points to a defense every week this week so far. So a great matchup for Cincinnati, and they're not owned in a ton of leagues, and their secondary is really good. So they're definitely going to force Tennessee to keep the ball on the ground. It's going to shorten the game, which is going to lower the scoring and the stats. So great matchup for Cincinnati at Tennessee. They're the number 1 streamer for me this week. Number 2 is going to be one that's owned in just over 60% at Kansas City, owned in 65% of leagues, but they're going up against the New York Jets and Zach Wilson, who has looked just terrible so far this year. And Kansas City looks like the real deal. And the Jets are giving up at least 16 fantasy points to defense the last 2 weeks. So another one to keep your eye on there just in case Kansas City is available. And then last but certainly not least, a deeper and a lot riskier pick, but the Houston defense has played fairly well against Baltimore and Jacksonville, which are 2 pretty solid offenses this year. Now they got a Pittsburgh offense that's given up an average of 10 fantasy points a game to defenses, and looks like they're just kind of struggling in general. Plus, they have a defensive-minded head coach in D'Amico Ryans coming from San Francisco that was running that now top-of-the-line defense in the league at one time and kind of built that defense, and now he's in Houston, and I think his defense is only going to improve as the year goes. and they get a pretty easy matchup this week at Pittsburgh, and then next week they're playing at home against Atlanta, which is another really decent matchup. So I like Pittsburgh a lot. But that's going to pretty much round out our fantasy waiver wire pod for week 4. I appreciate everybody that listens. We're thankful for our sponsors and our listeners. Please like, subscribe, download, give us some feedback, what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear, and keep chasing that trophy, guys. And we'll come at y'all later on this week.